Original Love, a Biblical Love Story. Chapter 1. Original Love. During his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus touched several key areas that are a struggle for man. One of the points he mentioned was this: "Ye have heard that it has been said by them of old, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." Matthew 5:27 and 28. For any Christian man, these words seem to provide the crushing blow to any sense of righteousness he might feel he possesses. In these words, Jesus touches the very core of man's slavery to sin. For any man seeking to be pure in heart, this pronouncement drives him to his knees in sorrow and a deep sense of his need of the living Saviour in his heart. To know Jesus is to know that he never looked upon a woman to lust after her. With the knowledge of this reality, we have hope that we as fallen men might be transported in our hearts back to original love. When we think about the event when Adam first saw Eve, most men imagine that Adam said, "Whoa, man!" Yet this places onto Scripture the inclinations of the perverted heart. Many men can't even contemplate imagery of the garden for fear their corrupted nature will take control. To understand the love that was in the heart of Adam when he saw Eve, we simply need to read the Bible. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man he made into a woman, and he brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Genesis 2:22 and 23. Notice carefully the words of Adam as their eyes meet. This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. The basis of this original love was not that Adam saw something beautiful which he desired to possess. He saw someone that had drawn their life from him. He saw a person that had come from next to his heart, and therefore he cherished her as his second self. As Paul clearly expressed it, so husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. Ephesians 5:28-30. So we see that just as Adam said to Eve, "You are my flesh and bone," in the same manner the second Adam says to the church, "You are of my flesh and bone." He loves us not because we have anything to offer him, but because we came from him. Such love. Beyond this, if you read the story in Genesis 2 carefully, you will see that Adam was placed in the garden over all creation before the woman was created from his rib. When she came forth from him, all that he possessed he gave to her to be a joint steward with him. Once again, did he do this because he saw something he desired to own and control? Did he seek to buy her with his assets? No, that is not the love that was in Adam's heart for Eve. The love that was in his heart was the love that comes from God, for God is love. But what love is that? The Greek for this is agape, which means benevolent love, a love that does not depend on any qualities possessed by the receiver. The Greek word that often means love today is Eros, which is never endorsed in the Bible. Eros is a love of that which is beautiful, noble, and lovely. Eros is the desire to possess and enjoy the things that please our eyes, appetites, and bodies. See Judges 14, verses 2 and 3, and 2 Samuel 11, verse 2 as examples. When Eve came to Adam with the forbidden fruit, she came possessing something that God had not given to Adam to give to her. With this fruit, Eve now possessed something that he did not have. She had come from the tree with her mind filled with a new way of thinking. Satan beguiled Eve with his subtle words. Satan spoke to her as one who possessed beauty in herself. He did not address her as one who had received her inheritance from Adam. He addressed her simply as beautiful, and this flattered her and caused her to forget the source of her beauty. The mind that looks upon a woman and thinks of her beauty in order to obtain something from her is a mind inspired by Satan. There was something strange yet exciting about Eve when she came to her husband, immersed in her rebellion. With her new sense of who she was, her forwardness, self-confidence, and her ambition had a kind of attraction to Adam. It was strange yet intriguing. In taking the fruit, Adam not only defied the law of God, he also established a new law, one that would cause all his sons to look to the woman to give them something. Within the hearts of men would be stamped this sense that the woman was the life-giver. She possessed the path to vitality. And so the worship of the sacred feminine began, and the symbol of man's new slavery was the image in his mind of the naked female form. This is the image that for most men would become the token of that transaction in the garden, that man would look to the woman to give him life, rather than the woman looking to the man to give her life. In that transaction, the love of man tragically switched from agape to eros. It changed from a love that gives without seeking anything for self to a love that is only attracted to that which pleases self. The natural mind may think that this new love is a step up for women, but actually it bound the woman in slavery. In order to provide the man his eye candy, in order to attract the man, she must possess something to give him. The world of fashion and body enhancements is born. The woman now seeks to display her worth to the man she desires from her own resources. She unwittingly rejects her inheritance from the man and approaches him on her own terms, and the resulting experience is hollow for both man and woman. The man is left continually lusting, and the woman is left forever insecure. Note carefully that the original love Adam felt for Eve was not based on what she possessed in herself, but in that she had come forth from him. He bestowed all that he was given upon her because she had come forth from him, and therefore was part of him, and the responsibilities they had to each other were perfectly understood. That is agape. That is original love. Note also that the only way to ensure that agape is pure is to know for certainty that the receiver had nothing inherent in them to cause the love to be awakened. If the woman possessed something inherently that had not come from the man, then eros would awaken, and the woman then must continue to produce what first attracted the man, and this leads to death. Any quality in man outside of the purpose of God is fleeting and impermanent, and a love based on generating or requiring that quality can never be sustained. In God's plan, the woman didn't need to prove her value or compatibility to the man. Remember, Adam gave the reason why he loved the woman. She is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. That is the basis of original love. And just as the inheritance of Eve from Adam was the surety of his agape for her, so too the inheritance of Christ from his Father is the surety of his agape for his Son. For we were made in their image. The Father stated, "And lo, a voice from heaven saying, 'This is my beloved,' or agapetos, Son, in whom I am well pleased." Matthew 3:17. The only possible way for God to truly have agape for his Son is that the Son received all he had from his Father. That is the only way to ensure benevolent love. If the Father looks into the eyes of his Son and loves him because he is omnipotent or because he is omniscient, then this is not agape. Rather, this is a form of Eros. Yet because the Bible tells us that God gave his Son everything, this reveals that his love is purely agape, and this is the love he shares with us. We love with agape because he first loved his Son with agape. We love or agape him because he first loved or agaped us. 1 John 4:19. If we worship a God who loves because of inherent qualities, then we will do the same. We will become what we behold. Yet if we worship a Son who was given all things and rests in the assurance of his Father's sweet, benevolent agape love, then we can be transformed into the image of this love and love as God loved his Son. Our God is agape, and in him is no eros at all. Chapter 2. Not Ashamed. The statistics speak for themselves when it comes to human relationships. More than 50% of marriages end in divorce in many countries, providing clear indications that these people did not find what they expected in the relationship. Many who remain married have an experience that is often just as desolate, but they don't divorce because they see no better options or are too afraid to make a change. The waves of disappointment, confusion, frustration, anger, and sorrow that result from these toxic experiments in human intimacy can be summed up with a question from a song that arrested my teen attention growing up in the 80s. What is love anyway? Does anybody love anybody anyway? In the last chapter, we addressed this question of what is love by examining what happened when Adam first saw Eve. We recall that when Adam said, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," he loved her not because of what she possessed in herself, but that she had come forth from him and had the capacity to know him, his dreams, joys, aspirations, and to be a companion to share his journey. The purity, innocence, and freedom of this love is summed up from these words. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Genesis 2:25. The word ashamed in Hebrew carries the following meaning: to be disappointed, to be delayed, meaning to have an expectation unfulfilled, to be confounded or confused, to become dry and by implication desolate. What Adam and Eve experienced was everything we desire but nearly always fail to obtain, if it is ever attained. The pathway from joy, freedom, fulfillment, innocence, and intimacy to disappointment, confusion, and desolation is traced in the transaction of taking and eating the fruit that was not theirs to take. This transaction that caused our fall from agape into Eros. We need to sift through the Bible story like an archaeologist seeking ancient treasure, carefully brushing away the sands of time to discover the facts of history, which then speak meaning into our existence. This love that Adam and Eve shared was carefully constructed and developed by God to ensure their eternal intimacy and happiness. The very origins of our first parents hold the secret to this unashamed love that hid no disappointments. Note carefully the following. God created Adam and placed him in the garden. Genesis 2 verse 7. God made Adam steward and sovereign of this paradise. Genesis 2 verses 8 and 15. God commanded Adam about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. Genesis 2 verse 16. God arranged circumstances to cause Adam to feel a need of a companion. Genesis 2 verse 20. God puts Adam to sleep. Figuratively, the Hebrew word can mean death. Genesis 2 verse 21. God takes Adam's rib and forms the woman from the living rib. Genesis 2 verse 22. God brings the woman to the resurrected man. Genesis 2 verse 22. This sequence is vital to grasp the secret of the unashamed original love of our parents. There was nothing that Eve possessed that she had not received from God through Adam. The singular sovereignty and rulership that Adam possessed was laid to rest, and he was resurrected to newness of life with a companion taken from his side. When Adam went to sleep, his heart was full of a desire to open his heart, overflowing with love to someone who could understand him. When he awoke, he beheld one upon whom he could bestow all that he had received and possessed from God. Adam, knowing all this, bestows upon the woman all that he has. She has his rib, his DNA, his heart, his home, his garden, everything. She even is aware that Adam went to sleep and gave up part of himself for her. In response, the woman sees all that she has been given, and she looks into the eyes of her husband. Her heart is filled with gratitude, joy, and happiness. The woman lives each moment knowing that all that she possesses was given to her through her husband. The transaction between the man and woman could be sustained in an eternal motion of love that would overflow like a fountain and that would never be ashamed. The secret, the key, the hub, the pivot, the core, the heart of this wonderful motion of love resides in the simple fact of knowing and remembering your origin and how you came to be. As long as Adam remembered that he was created and placed in the garden as leader and sovereign to care for, protect, and be a faithful steward of all that he was given him, then he would pour all the blessing given him upon that for which he was made sovereign. As the woman receives the fullness of blessing from her husband and looks to him in loving respect, joyful submission, and trusting obedience, as she reveals her confidence in his leadership, and as she honors his headship, like the woman standing at the well, she draws out of his heart far greater blessing than was previously exhibited. We might illustrate this love motion through the action of a two-piston motor. The first piston is Adam, in his joy at being introduced to a true companion that came from him, ignites and releases a wave of blessing that sends joyful ignition fuel into the second piston cavity, and at the same time turning the crankshaft, which then raises the second piston toward the ceiling, which then ignites a loving response. The response from the second piston exalts the first piston and fills that cavity with joyful submission, honor, and respect. This then propels more blessing, and the cycle of blessing, generation, and reception flows ever continuously. What a wonderful design! What a wonderful illustration of how the universe works. For we were made in the image of God. Genesis 1 verse 27. Again we stress the point that this eternal love motion depended upon each person knowing their origin, knowing their true identity, and their place within the creation of God. As long as Adam remembered that he was the head of the garden and that all was under his care, having been given to him by God, yet it all still belonged to God. Then he would tend and keep that which was given to him. He would continue to pour his blessing on all under his care, as it was his duty, honour, and joy to do so. As long as Eve remembered that her life came from Adam, and that all she beheld, for which she now was co-ruler with Adam, was given to her by her husband by the will of God, then she would have completed the circuit of blessing, and both of them would never have been ashamed. Chapter 3. Made in his image, the divine pattern. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1:26 and 27. Through a close reading of Genesis 1 and 2, we have revealed a relationship between Adam and Eve that would have remained in a perpetual motion of agape love. The secret of this love motor was contained in each member remembering where they came from and what they had received. The cascading love of God was poured upon Adam, and then from Adam upon Eve, and then returning in gratitude back to the source from whom it came. The Bible tells us that this first human relationship was an image or pattern of God and his Son, for we were made in their image. And what more can we learn of this pattern? But unto us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. 1 Corinthians 8:6. The Father is described as the of whom of all things, the source of all life and blessing. The Son is described as the by whom of all things, the channel of all life and blessing. The distinction between the of whom and the by whom is vital for the agape love motor to remain in eternal motion. How so? The Son, in recognizing the Father as the of whom are all things, is constantly in a state of appreciation to the Father for giving him all things. As the Father looks upon his Son as the one who has come from himself, he desires to pour blessing upon him and give him all things, because that is the nature and heart of the Father's agape, to give. This love motor will continue to pour forth a fountain of blessing as long as the Father and Son retain their identities as of whom and by whom. The cascading nature of this fountain of blessing is revealed in these words. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 3. Just as God the Father is the head of Christ, so also is the man the head of the woman. This is a key part of what it means to be made in their image. The reference to being the head is directly related to how Genesis uses this term in the garden. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it parted, and became into 4 heads. Genesis 2 verse 10. The divine pattern presents the head as the source of blessing, because our Heavenly Father is the source of all blessing. As that blessing passes to his Son, he becomes the head over the man for the purpose of pouring blessing. The man receives this blessing and is enabled to be the head to pour blessing upon his wife. To whom does the wife direct her gratitude? She expresses it to all those who have been part of the channel to pass blessing to her, to God and to his Son and her husband. The key to keeping this channel of blessing going is to know who is your head, who is the of whom over you to whom you direct your gratitude. So it becomes clear that this whole system hinges upon knowing the distinction between who is an of whom to you and who is a by whom from you. If you examine the Bible carefully, you will see this divine pattern of headship and submission revealed in many places. Father and son, husband and wife, father and mother, mother and child, Christ and husband, Christ and the church, elders, pastors, and the flock, king, governors, and subjects and citizens, Bible and pastors and elders. The more fully this divine pattern is followed, the more blessings will flow upon us and our families. For instance, when we honour our father and mother, we are promised long life. When we esteem highly and love those who are over us, we are blessed by their preaching of the word and exhortations to a godly life. Apart from the direct blessings of joy, happiness, and fellowship that flow to us through this divine pattern, there are also the protective blessings that we can accrue through the channel. In each case, the one by whom things come is under the protection and possesses the authority of the one of whom things come. As an example of how much protection a child can have, we see 1. The child is protected by the mother. 2. Who is protected by her husband. 3. Who is protected by the police. 4. Who are protected by the government. 5. Who are ordained of God. Taking this in a spiritual direction, we see 1. The father is exhorted by the elders or pastors. 2. Who are subject to the word of God. 3. Which was written by the prophets. 4. Which was and is given by Christ. 5. Who receives it from his Father. The more we move into positions reflecting the divine pattern, the greater our protection, blessing, peace, and joy. We could illustrate this blessing system as a giant irrigation system to move the Spirit of God throughout the universe. Each family becomes a relay station to keep the blessing flowing down and the gratitude flowing back. Each community, church, and nation also become motors to assist in ensuring that every person in the system is filled with the agape of the Father. Obviously, it would be foolish to suggest that God and His Son would forget who they are. The source of this fountain will never stop flowing. The Bible assures us, "For I am the Lord, I change not." Malachi 3 verse 6. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13 verse 8. The Father and His Son will never change. The fountain of life that flows from the throne of God will not stop. Yet we know there has been a break in this channel. The introduction of sin was the introduction of a thought process that would think to change the laws of the divine pattern. The origins of this lawlessness began with Lucifer, who fell away from the agape of God into the Eros of self. The scripture tells us how Satan wished to alter the divine pattern. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Isaiah 14:12-14. In these texts we see a being who does not seek to be under the protection and care of the divine pattern, but rather seeks to be like, meaning to resemble, the Most High. Satan rejects the truth that he has received everything he has, and instead seeks to stand in the same position as God Himself. Originally, Satan wanted to be made equal to the Son, the one who was immediately over him, rather than to be under Christ's authority. Satan wanted to report directly to the Father, without being under Christ and going through Christ. The Father, via the divine pattern, moved to defend and protect his Son, and declared the relationship that Christ sustained to all the creation. Christ did not defend himself or speak in his own defense. All this was done by the Father. Satan rejected the Father's command to worship and honor his Son, and thereafter desired to be exactly like the Most High. It was Satan's desire to be considered like the Most High that conceived the lie which was told to our first parents, that "You shall be like God," and "You shall not surely die." Lucifer was created to be a light bearer. God had given him more than any other created being. See Ezekiel 28, verse 14. As Lucifer beheld all that he was given, he strangely forgot that it was indeed given, and that he was blessed as the recipient of so much. Lucifer owed everything he had to the Son of God, who had created him by the will of the Father. If Lucifer continued to look to the Son in appreciation and model himself after the Son, who lived in loving submission, obedience, and gratitude to his Father, he would never have fallen from the divine pattern into sin. The root of sin is to forget your identity as one who has received everything by the hand of the Son of God, by the will of God the Father. If we should become confused in any way concerning the of whom and by whom relationship of the Father and Son, then the divine pattern becomes broken in our minds, and we cease to be part of the channel of blessing. It is vital to remember this principle. But we all, with open face beholding, as in a glass, the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18. As created beings, we naturally are transformed into an image of what we perceive as divine. How we understand God is what we will aspire to be. Satan introduced to the human race a concept that caused us to think that we could be like God, not so much in character, but in power, knowledge, and life. The security of agape resides in knowing that the Son of God received all he had from his Father. As we discussed earlier, any idea that the Son has his own independent qualities that attract the Father in any way destroys the truth that God is only and always agape. If it is understood that God is attracted to something inherently powerful, then God is inherently Eros, a lover of the beautiful, powerful, and majestic. When we understand the Son of God as one who received all things, and that it was nothing inherent in the Son that caused the Father to make him equal with himself, then we can be assured that the principle of agape will not fade from our minds. Knowing the identity of the Son of God is the secret to remaining in the fountain channel of agape. As Jesus told us, Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. John 14, verse 6. He that hath the Son hath life, and he that hath not the Son of God hath not life. 1 John 5, verse 12. The secret for a husband and wife to remain in an agape love modal relationship is to honor the Father as our of whom God, and Jesus as our by whom Lord. See 1 Corinthians 8, verse 6. When we have this divine pattern in our minds, we will be transformed into an image of their relationship in our human sphere, just as God said of us in the beginning that we were made in the image of God. It would be wonderful to think that from the position we stand in the stream of human history, that we could simply choose to live like this. But this is not possible when we understand how terrible the fall of man was. The promise of the serpent to Eve that we would be like God and that we would not die had terrible consequences for us. Chapter 4. The Sorceress and Her Apprentice. As we have examined the original love that existed in the Garden of Eden, we found in the persons of Adam and Eve an engine of perpetual love that was designed to flow out to the promised population of the earth. The pouring forth of blessing from Adam to Eve, and the returning of appreciation from Eve to Adam, would keep a constant fuel supply of love for the two members. Remaining anchored to their origins of headship and submission would be a constant reminder that all they possess was given to them by the agape of our gracious God. Just how long this motion of love continued in that beautiful garden we are not told, but sadly events took place that would cause this motor to grind to a halt. We want to examine these events carefully and consider how original love was shattered and replaced with the fallen love which we know as Eros. For whatever reason, Eve finds herself at the forbidden tree, pondering the meaning of God's prohibition against eating its fruit. An intelligent voice comes from a serpent, aroused curiosity as much as concern, and held her transfixed. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Genesis 3 verse 1. Eve was well aware that God had given everything to her husband, and that she possessed all things from God through him. The question concerning a direct command of God was an attempt to place doubt in the woman's mind about what was true. The thought to question what God had said was new to Eve, and each continued moment she stayed in dialogue with the serpent, the further away she was being drawn from her position in the creation of God. The enticement to defend God was an invitation to step out of the channel of blessing. The question was an invitation to deal with the matter herself and cause her to forget that she should not have spoken to any unknown external questioner without the covering and protection of her husband. This should have been enough for her to just walk away and not say a word. We get a clue that Eve was not completely relaxed in her answer. As is often the case when we experience fear or are under pressure, we can sometimes overstate a case as if the extra fortification will prevent the penetration of the suggestion into our minds. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest ye die. Genesis 3 verses 2 and 3. But what had God actually said to her husband, which he then instructed her? But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Genesis 2 verse 17. God had said that if you eat it you will die, and Eve in her anxiety added that if you touch it you will die. This was the perfect opportunity for Satan to strike. Placing the fruit in her hands, she was now faced with the apparent evidence that she was touching it, and she was not actually dead. From her own mouth had come the evidence Satan needed to apparently prove that God was lying. Her confidence that she could handle this situation without needing her ordained protector led her to a place where it seemed plain to her that God was not telling her the truth. Her desire to defend God opened the way for Satan to cause Eve to doubt God. So cunning a foe, so seductive his arguments. Eve did not know that she was communicating with an evil spirit, not just any spirit, but the father of all evil spirits. We might argue that the woman had no idea what was happening to her, but she knew enough to know that she should not act in self-confidence, but rather run to the arms of the man from whom she had received all things, who was given to her by God to be her spiritual protector and shield. Seeing that the woman is now confronted with apparent irrefutable evidence that God is not trustworthy, Lucifer strikes his blow against Agape in his war to establish Eros as supreme. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3 verses 4 and 5. The statement, You shall not surely die, contains the seed of the deadly poisonous heresy that our life is not dependent upon God, but is something we possess naturally. Add to this the notion that I can acquire things in the natural world to enhance my life, my power, and myself, and we get the wretched concoction that utterly cuts off from our Creator. This lie, if entertained, would kill off the natural sense of appreciation that the woman felt towards the man because she came out of him and received her life from him. Secondly, she would no longer need to feel appreciation for the natural world around her being given to her because of her courage and effort. She herself had found a substance that would elevate her to her true identity as a goddess. No longer would she submit to the suffrage of male domination and control. She had found another way to God, and the way was through herself. The way was a simple recognition of her inherent divinity revealed to her by the wisdom of the beneficent serpent. The words of the serpent were taking effect because suddenly she saw something in the fruit. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat it. Genesis 3 verse 6. The seed of the serpent caused her to see the tree as something inherently good, as something pleasant to the eyes. She was attracted to the intrinsic qualities of this tree that she thought would give her more value. And in eating its fruit, she sealed her decision to accept the new perception of reality that was opposite to what God had said. In case we miss what has just taken place here, let's walk through this carefully. Eve was talking to an evil spirit. When she ate the fruit and decided in favor of what that spirit told her, she invited him to take control of her mind. Therefore, when she approached Adam, she was demon-possessed. Worse still, she came bearing the message of the evil spirit that promised magical powers to become like God, and by definition, that makes our first mother a sorceress. As the woman returns from the tree, she is under the control of Satan. She now comes to her husband, not as a submissive wife, but as a teacher of a new religion. As Adam stands before Eve, we see the prefiguring of men through the ages who have stood before the feminine oracles, such as Delphi and others, who have promised them knowledge of their future destiny. As Adam beholds his wife, who was bone of his bone, he comes into contact with a spirit that no longer recognizes him as her master and benefactor. She had found another soulmate, another teacher, who had promised her all that her heart desired without the need to submit to anyone. She had come not to be taught, but to teach, not to submit, but to command submission. This feminine spirit, now ruled by the forces of darkness, will be used as Lucifer's seductive medium to convince Adam to become his apprentice. It is not the spirit of gratitude that wafts up into the mind of Adam from Eve, but another spirit, a restless and excitable spirit, an erotic and intoxicating spirit, a seductive and deceptive spirit. As he looks at her, she is now sending him visual signals and pheromones that he pleases her, and she uses her body as a tool of attraction to bring Adam into slavery of her inherently new divine form. Adam hears the serpent siren cry of this sorceress who presents herself as his loving wife, not knowing that she is possessed by the spirit of a vampire seeking to feed upon his corpse, and from these ashes bring forth the phoenix in the form of Nimrod. It would have been well for Adam to remember. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life, to keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of the strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Proverbs 6, verses 23 to 26. Adam wrestles with the serpent through the medium of the sorceress. Through her, Lucifer applies his magical powers, seeking to attract him to the new religion. In her hand she promises life, but in his heart Adam knows this is death. To deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger which flattereth with her words, which forsaketh the guide of her youth, and forgetteth the covenant of her God. For her house inclineth unto death, and her paths unto the dead. Proverbs 2, verses 16 to 18. Adam does not realize that his wife is already dead, the sweet, submissive, obedient woman whose heart was full of gratitude to God through her husband, died at the tree of knowledge. As a son of this woman, I mourn for her, my poor sweet mother, murdered at the tree of knowledge and replaced by a spirit as wicked as hell itself. Yet more than this, the sweet submissive spirit that resided in the heart of Eve was indeed the Spirit of Christ. And in eating the fruit she nailed Christ to the cross, and therefore he became the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Did Adam vainly hope that in eating the fruit he might enter this dark land and rescue his poor wife? Did he also feel safe in engaging the devil and beating him? As I think about our father Adam and the trauma he faced, my heart reaches out to him in sorrow. I want to cry out to him, "Please, Father, please don't sin against our Agape Father." But alas, I cannot reach his ear, and he takes the fruit. The New World Order was established. Adam would become the slave of the woman. She would be the teacher, and he would be the student or apprentice. Now there would be part of the man which would look to the woman for life, and yet, having also taken the fruit, he too would have feelings of determination never to be ruled by her or by anybody else. They both now would be locked in the battle of the sexes for the right to both enjoy and control. As we believe that the other has something of intrinsic power, life becomes a battle to possess and control the objects we are attracted to. The purity and innocence of the original love motor that released blessing from the head and gratitude from the submitter is replaced by a game of mutual attraction and repulsion. This was a new world where the supposedly opposite attract. The new religion teaches that each soul has natural immortality and that we can enhance our inherent power by merging with another immortal being. The secret of this new erotic form of love is to attract a partner that will enhance you, but to never allow them to dominate you. The new experience of male and female intimacy is one of seduction mixed with careful manipulation, a process of revealing your body and hiding your spirit. The beautiful experience of holy love that provided perpetual circular motion in the bonds of appreciation and respect is replaced with the crude new reality of back and forth mutual attraction and repulsion, momentary pleasure that gives way to feelings of emptiness and even disgust. This new heart lust is always seeking yet never satisfied. The new motions of men and women were not a circle of love that would disperse the Spirit of Christ to the whole world, but rather a magnetic suction that consumed all in its path like a sinister black hole. The genius of the agape motor is that both elements in the motor know that all they have was given to them, and that because God is agape, He will give us whatever we need. Conversely, the Eros motor must seek out and possess for itself, and therefore is never content or satisfied. It comes as somewhat of a shock to think of Eve as a demon-possessed sorceress. This is just as it was for Adam, who when he looked at Eve must have felt in some way that someone as beautiful and as delicate as her could not be as bad as what she was suggesting. People today tend to think of what Eve did as minor. There is no doubt she was deceived and did not understand what had happened to her, but this only made Satan's use of her the more deadly in causing the fall of Adam. Does this not mean that men should blame women for the fall? Certainly not. The destiny of the human race was primarily in his hands, and he made the fatal decision as head of the human family. Headship means that Adam was responsible for the fall of the race. But to fully understand the issues between men and women, we need to understand as best we can what took place in the beginning and how we fell from that original love. The Bible says, "A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways." Man is double-minded in that he feels he is both master and slave of the woman. He both looks to her for precious treasure and expects her to provide what he needs, while at the same time he wishes to dominate and control her. This double-mindedness causes the man to be unable to see the plan of God to draw him back to agape, which would give him the desire to bless his wife and hope for her respect and honour of his headship. As the priestess of the new religion, the woman would desire to bring the man to heel as her foot soldier, while at the same time feel both infatuated and fearful of his strength and warlike disposition. It cannot be overstated that two beings that seek to draw from each other and simultaneously seek to dominate each other can only self-destruct. The principles of consumerism and domination have no capacity to grasp eternity, for they are inherently destructive. Without the introduction of a new seed, the fallen human experience, with its Eros motor of mutual attraction and repulsion, would have ended right in the garden, its vacuum force causing it to implode. Although the Spirit of Christ was repelled upon the entrance of sin, the promise of his death as the seed of the woman opened a door for a remnant of Adam to be reclaimed to the kingdom of agape. Chapter 5. The Promised Seed of Agape. I find it amazing when I think about the migration of birds, like the Canada goose, that instinctively flies from the Arctic Circle to the southern states of the USA to avoid the bitter Arctic winter. Our Heavenly Father places within the goose an instinct that allows it to navigate thousands of miles with amazing accuracy in order to allow the species to survive. Could you imagine if the sense of direction within the geese actually drove them to the North Pole? How devastating that would be. Within a very short period, the entire population of geese would be wiped out. Sadly, this illustrates what happened to the human race when our first parents accepted the serpent's lie and began to trust that the life they possessed was naturally theirs. Instead of their hearts naturally turning towards God in gratitude and love, they developed a natural desire to ascend into the sides of the north and to be like the Most High. See Isaiah 14:12-14. The lie that they would be like God changed their sense of direction completely and set the human race in the direction of flying north rather than south to safety. The once beautiful twin-piston motor of Agape came under new impulses and forces that transformed the motor from a fountain that poured forth kindness, patience, and gratitude into a stinking sewer that spewed forth its torrent of selfishness, domination, deceit, lies, and hatred in order to please self. A toxic seed had been planted in the mind of Eve, and then she was deceptively used by Satan to plant that seed in the mind of Adam. Once that seed took root in the sacred chambers of his mind, the blueprint for the Agape motor was destroyed, and the laws of inheritance that were designed to reproduce this Agape motor in the minds of Adam's children would now instead receive a blueprint for an Eros motor that causes the heart to fly north and seek to be God's, rather than fly south and submissively worship the true God, the giver of all life and blessing. This little seed had lodged itself deep in the recesses of the human mind. It was not possible for God to simply put Adam to sleep and take the seed out. This was not a mechanical problem, but rather a spiritual problem. There was only one possible way for God to be able to get that seed and destroy it. One way for God to be able to access the mind of man and restore the Agape motor. We read about this plan in Genesis 3 verses 15 and 16. Speaking to Satan, God says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." Genesis 3 verses 15 and 16. This was a daring plan that involved great risk. A child would be born, a descendant of Adam and Eve that would engage the devil on his own ground and would destroy the toxic Eros seed hidden deep in the heart of man. Satan would bruise his heel in that battle, but he would destroy Satan in the end, and a path of escape would be made for the human family. The promise of the seed passed from generation to generation, and each time that promise was repeated, Abraham was promised that the seed would come through his family line, and all the family of the earth would be blessed through him. See Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. Speaking of this promise, Paul says in the New Testament, "Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ." Galatians 3, verse 16. The seed that would come was Christ. He would come from heaven with his Agape motor, and would be born into the human family with its Eros motor. The conflict would be fierce, as the seed of the serpent would seek to kill the seed of the woman and prevent him from destroying the Eros motor in man. So great was this conflict that as Christ was nearing the citadel of the Eros kingdom in the heart of man, he cried out these words to his Father. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." Matthew 26, verse 39. In speaking of this great conflict to come, the prophet Isaiah said of him, "Just as many were astonished at you, so his visage was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men." Isaiah 52, verse 14. In this mind war with Satan, the Son of God would be granted the right to enter the battlefield by becoming one of the human family. He would take upon him a nature that contained the toxic seed, in order that he might destroy it. Through the principle of agape love, the Son of God would make a path in the human mind that would cause us to hate or have enmity toward that toxic seed. And since Christ was certain to descend from Adam, God was therefore able to place this enmity towards Satan's seed in the heart of Adam and Eve. Once Christ had come and carved that narrow path by a life that resisted the Eros motor at every turn, he then could take that toxic seed to the grave and destroy it. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honour, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. Hebrews 2 verse 9. Forasmuch then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. Hebrews 2:14. Having destroyed the serpent's seed, Christ could then offer hope along the narrow path that he walked for us. If we would walk in his steps, we also could resist that toxic seed, for we inherit his seed through faith in him as our second Adam. See 1 Corinthians 15 verse 45. Once again, the precious fountain of agape love could flow into the hearts of men and women. What an amazingly wonderful plan, and what amazing love that God would give his Son to such a dangerous mission, that we might have the chance to live again in the current of agape that flows from the throne of God. Returning to Genesis 3:15, we notice that God allowed the pain level of the woman in childbirth to be increased. This was to symbolize the pain of the conflict between the two seeds. The Eros motor of Adam would indeed pass to his children, and the pain endured by the woman would reveal the conflict between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Each child would be given a measure of light from Christ to give them a hatred for the serpent's seed. Yet the serpent's seed being the new default starting point, it would make every effort to destroy the new seed from Christ. Every childbirth is a reminder of the struggle of Christ to overcome the seed of the serpent, and the great struggle for the man to be born into the kingdom of light. So in every childbirth we see the truth. For the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. Galatians 5 verse 17. The final part of Genesis 3:16 gives us an indication of the recovery that would take place through the seed of the woman. The natural reaction to this statement is negative, yet this reaction is simply the consequence of the Eros mindset we have all inherited. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. To the sorceress, her daughters, and their hapless apprentices, this statement is a declaration of war that must be opposed at all costs. But for those who are walking the narrow path laid down by Christ, this statement is a wonderful promise of the agape motor restored in the husband and wife relationship. The desire towards the husband in the wife is the awakening of the agape that recognizes that all things were given to her through him. The rulership of the husband is a reminder that the woman came forth from him and that she is entitled to his love and protection. Desire and rulership are the two pistons that deliver the promise of agape, returning us to the image of the sweet fountain that flows from the throne of God. This desire that comes from the heart of the woman is the very Spirit of Christ, whose desire is towards his Father, as the one who gave him all things. That desire sets aright the navigation system that allows us to gratefully migrate south to the feet of the life-giver and allow him alone to be ruler from the north. Genesis 3 verse 16 delivers the promise of the divine pattern restored. Chapter 6. The Tyrant Offspring of Eros. Satan wasted no time in seeking to defeat the promised seed by putting the Eros motor to work, releasing a tide of violence and desolation. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 6 verse 5. Let us retrace our steps a little to see how quickly the principles of Eros encapsulated in the words of the serpent could lead to a cleansing of the entire world by water. We recall that when Eve came to Adam, possessed by Satan, holding the forbidden fruit, she came as a messenger. Satan was seeking to draw Adam into his Eros kingdom through Eve. She sought to win him to her side and make him her apprentice. Now that she had entered the new kingdom, she looked upon Adam as a power that could assist her, standing by her against whatever may come. She seeks to attract him with her beauty and holds the deadly fruit before him as a treasure worthy of his possession. This fruit held the promise of a new world where he was master of his own universe. As the messenger, Eve became the gateway to this new experience. The initial exhilaration the fruit delivered, combined with the adventure into the forbidden, soon gave way to the emptiness and unfulfilled expectation. This was the nakedness and shame that they had never known before. Adam's disappointment is felt by Eve, and she also is disappointed that her husband is not fulfilled, nor thankful, but rather aloof, slightly deflated, and maybe even slightly irritated. Note carefully that this process of promise that leads to disappointment is played out over and over in male and female relationships. The gateway of the naked female form promises the man exhilaration and the world of his dreams. This deep-seated desire to possess and enjoy the woman is the natural extension of man's desire to possess and enjoy the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Remember that the lie of the serpent promised us power within, and now Adam, instead of looking at Eve as one who had come from himself, sees her as a power through which he can reach his own divinity. In order to attract the woman, he displays his powers to impress her. This is the process of mutual attraction. Of course, the woman cannot provide the divine experience. The fleeting feelings of a moment soon evaporate, and the man remains mortal and even less fulfilled than before. For most men, this becomes a sorry cycle. Deep within his psyche, the naked female form promises him life, divinity, and godhood, and then the resulting failure to deliver lasting results causes feelings of emptiness and sometimes frustration. The mood changes and the man becomes more demanding, expecting the woman to perform and bring him the experience he desires that will last. The woman's sense of inability to please her husband causes her either to fall into a frozen despair or a responding anger and disgust at the man's continual advances and obsession with sex. Thus, mutual repulsion ends the cycle. Much of the controversy in the bedroom stems directly from the fruit in the garden and the promised divinity by the alluring naked woman. This is the cycle of Eros. 1. Attraction. 2. Anticipation. 3. Possession. 4. Disappointment. 5. Repulsion. At the heart of Eros thinking is the belief that the possession of that which appears beautiful, lovely, and delicious will give us what we are seeking. This is doomed to failure and destruction, for the story of original love reveals that we were not created this way, nor do we inherently possess anything that can deliver any such sense of lasting satisfaction. The results of this Eros cycle expand from the tree into the history of the male and female relations. That the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all, which they chose. Genesis 6 verse 2. If you look carefully at this verse, you see a parallel to what happened with Eve and the fruit. 1. Attraction. And when the woman saw, Genesis 3 verse 6. The sons of God saw, Genesis 6 verse 2. 2. Anticipation. That the tree was good for food, Genesis 3 6. The daughters of men, that they were fair, Genesis 6 verse 2. 3. Possession. She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, Genesis 3 6. And they took them wives of all, which they chose, Genesis 6 verse 2. 4. Disappointment. They knew that they were naked, Genesis 3 verse 7. Bear them that were tyrants, Genesis 6 verse 4. 5. Repulsion. Adam and his wife hid themselves. The woman thou gavest me, Genesis 3 verse 8 and 10. Wickedness of man was great, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, Genesis 6 verse 5. The sequence of the words saw, good, and took in Genesis 3 verse 6 are the same as the words saw, fair, and took in Genesis 6 verse 2. Seeing a good thing and taking it for your personal desire is the root of the principle of Eros. The sons of God are seduced just like their first mother. They see the woman is good for carnal food, and they take, possess, and devour. Each time a man lusts after a woman, he stands at the tree, taking the fruit from the serpent. Each time a man lusts after a woman, he is seduced by the lie that the woman has power to give him life and enhance his position in the natural world. It should be obvious that these fair women were not simply sitting at home trusting the Lord to bring the man to them. They were highlighting every curve and feature they could exploit to influence the man to take them. Every time a woman looks at herself in the mirror and asks herself, "Do I have the look? Will I turn heads in this outfit?" she stands at the tree, taking the fruit from the serpent. Every time a woman seeks to dress with the desire for men to look at her beauty, she is sure to taste the bitter fruit of Eros. This flirtatious game by men and women, where they look and desire to have something from the other, creates the natural Eros cycle of attraction, emptiness, and repulsion. The negative emotions that build up between the man and the woman become the seed of the next generation. Instead of growing up with a knowledge that all they possess comes from their parents and seeking to honour and please them, they seek rather to look for carnal food and take it and play out the whole process of seeking godhood through the gateway of the naked female form. The Bible says something significant about the children of such relationships. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6 verse 4. The word rendered mighty men means powerful, warrior, and tyrant. The children of those who chose women because they were good to look upon replayed the garden scene and based their relationship upon the principle of Eros, seeking that which pleases and enhances self. Within a few generations, this principle turned the world into a place of violence and depravity. The thoughts of their hearts were only evil continually. Despite the fact that the sweet Spirit of Christ was available to the sons of God, they chose a different path. When they chose a woman because she was fair, they revealed that their hearts were filled with Eros and not Agape. It reveals that the Spirit of Christ was rejected. These men were not saying, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." They were saying, "Whoa, man." When women sought to be fair and attract the man, they also chose Eros instead of Agape. They also rejected the Spirit of Christ. Any relationship built on this foundation will not endure the test of time. Bad fruit will always be the result. What if I became married through this process and acknowledged that physical attraction was central to the relationship formed? Behold the Son of God, and see that he is loved and cherished because he came out from God. See John 17 verse 8. As we behold him as he is, we can be transformed into his image and learn to love with agape love. For many of us, we have lived with decades of false thinking and seeking things from our partners. This thinking does not subside in an instant. The key to change is to know exactly who the Son of God is. He is the cornerstone of agape because he was given all things. Day after day, as we think about him, as we see his gentle, submissive spirit, resting always in the Father's care, we will become like him. And the more we behold him, the more we will realize the cost he was willing to make in order to give us back his agape spirit. We will be filled with gratitude. And as we realize the Father was willing to give him for this purpose, our hearts will begin to experience the truth of agape. See 1 John 4 verses 8 to 10. What if I'm in a relationship that started wrongly, but still am not married? We will address this in detail in later chapters. But the short answer is to behold the Son of God and repent for the desire to have and possess for yourself. It only leads to emptiness, sorrow, and potential violence. At this point, some might be thinking, are you saying people should not enjoy the sexual experience? It is evident that God provided the gift of sexuality to be enjoyed in its proper place. The question we are addressing is the motivation for that enjoyment and its symbolism for the hearts of men and women. What we have shown here is that sexual encounters based upon seeking personal ambition and desire will bear fruit that leaves bitterness in the soul. The seeds of Eros planted in the hearts of men and women was not restricted to their relationships. It became the natural process whenever one perceived the presence of another power. Of course, everything became a power in the Eros kingdom. The experience of eating the fruit of the tree made everything in the natural world a potential power for self-enhancement. Things owned by others became an appealing treasure. The spouse of another person could easily become the source of attraction. All this became natural in the world of Eros. The only question to be asked was, can I possess this power by direct force or by subtle manipulation? This is what turned the thoughts of man to evil continually. Rather than seeing the world created as a gift from our agape Father and his Son, everything became a treasure to take and possess in order to become divine. Sadly, since Eros depends on that which it can see, the invisible God who made them faded from their minds. Whatever God existed had to operate in the natural world for the eyes to see. Since mankind had fallen to the influence of Satan, their natural attitude towards God would be similar to Satan's desire concerning God. His desire, of course, was to simply be God in all his power and glory. See Isaiah 14 verses 12 to 14. Within the Eros kingdom, gaining and possessing the power that God alone possessed would become one of men's greatest obsessions. The process of winning the patronage of a god in order to receive his divine power became the heart of all man-made religion. Actually, knowing the true God was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was power as understood in the natural world. This led men to worship all kinds of things in their quest to possess what they perceived as divine. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Romans 1, verses 21 to 23. Combining the fruit of the tree and the female messenger, man developed systems of religion that worshipped the natural world and particularly the feminine principle. For many, the sexual experience became the gateway to the divine, and so men began to burn in their lusts not only for women, but for other men and also other creatures, anything that was perceived as powerful. This was all a natural extension of the Eros principle. The process of prayer to God became the simple process of asking in order to possess. From whence come wars and fighting among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts, that war in your members? Ye lust, and have not. Ye kill, and desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world, or Eros, is an enemy of God, or Agape. James 4 verses 1 to 4. This seeking for power through the natural world and the perverting of the knowledge of the true God fueled the violence and depravity that caused the old world to be destroyed by water. They drowned in a flood of Eros. How would the seed of the woman respond to this tragedy? Chapter 7. The Grief of God. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Genesis 6 verse 6. Within each moment of time, there flows forth from the throne of God a mighty torrent of loving grace and power that gives life to the earth. The majestic hills covered with trees, flowers and plants of many colours and scents provide a living backdrop for the home of men. Delicious fruits, savoury vegetables, 1,000 different flavours and delicacies lay upon the tables of men. Millions of hearts throb with the pulse of life that flows from the one who possesses immortality. It is the joy of God to give. Yet since the fall of man, there is no answering chord of gratitude, no heartfelt appreciation. Even among those who manage to offer a prayer of thanks for the food they are about to eat, the words are a pious ritual that seeks to convince the speaker and listeners that they are indeed thankful when they have merely come to see, to take, and to possess. They call it the terrible twos, the pain and shock that parents experience when their precious little bundle of joy first screws up its face and says, "No!" Such defiance, such foolishness bound up in the heart of a child. A mother is shopping with her toddler, and the child sees something that pleases him, and the hand instinctively reaches out to possess. The seeds of Eros are producing their toxic fruit. The mother passes by hoping the request will evaporate. There is a wail of despair, and the drama begins in earnest. Two wills now lock in battle. The child reaches out and begins to pull things from the shelf as the demands continue. The mother has the choice to offer something to pacify the child or try and endure the increasing drama with screams, sobs, and every possible tactic known to get its way. During this time, nearly every parental instruction is countered and resisted. This is raw human nature. For the majority of the human race, age only teaches us to be more crafty and calculated in manifesting our desires to see, take, and possess. The terrible twos are only a precursor to the often more chaotic teen years, where the battleground becomes far more complex, but the resistance is the same. At some point, parents become weighed down with a sense of grief. The memory of their precious bundle of joy they have nurtured, loved and cared for suddenly appears to mean little. Instead, that memory is often thrown back at you as an intimidation tactic. The resulting sorrow drives many parents into combat with a determination to crush this opposition. Mothers often plead with fathers to relent of their fury in response to repeated defiance, ingratitude, and disrespect. Some parents, in their rush to pacify a willful teen, buy them more and more things, but the satisfaction level keeps decreasing while the demands keep increasing. Such is the fruit that comes from the sorceress and her apprentice. If we could see things from the throne of God and witness the entire population of the human race drenched in the spirit of Eros, grasping for and seeking to possess the very things that God had freely given as a token of his agape love, could we then begin to understand his grief? With minds seared to spiritual realities, they have almost no capacity to perceive that he exists. Only the teeny ember of the promised seed whispers, in a still small voice, deep within the conscience, that all this was given freely from a heart full of agape love. With each replay of the Garden Eros scene, the less that man thinks of himself as a recipient of love. The more he takes for himself, the less gratitude he feels and the less he is able to give. Each cycle of Eros that turns attraction into disappointment creates a more intense desire to obtain, to dilute the disappointment. So we see the birth of addiction, engaging in a process that promises bliss, but leaves you feeling empty and depressed. Addiction is the perfect reflection of Eros having total control of the soul. In contrast, the simple principle of agape is stated as follows: freely ye have received, freely give. Matthew 10, verse 8. It is a simple yet powerful principle. The more you realize you have been given much, the more likely you are to give in the same manner. Only someone who knows they are blessed can bless. Only he who lives in a state of gratitude can truly give out a sense of abundance and fullness. As the psalmist declared, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Psalms 23, verses 5 and 6. Gratitude causes the cup to overflow to others, and once this process begins, it can ripple out and touch millions of lives. Such was the design of the Agape motor that was to bless all the families of the earth. Adam and Eve were to be the great original love pulse filled with gratitude that would flow out in great waves to all their children. But now the Eros motor had taken over, and the once vibrant soul of man became a desert of the disappointed desire to possess. As God looks over the population of the world for any who would respond to the seed of agape, when all seems lost, there is a man who responds. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6, verse 8. I love the simplicity of this verse. Noah, in his contemplation of the world, looks by faith beyond the natural world into the eyes of God and sees graciousness, favour, and kindness. Noah's heart is filled with gratitude. The secret to joy is to know you are blessed, blessed by the one who sits on the throne of the universe. Can we imagine the delight of God? After hundreds of years of almost no response to his torrent of grace, the spark of gratitude flickers in the soul of Noah. The Spirit of Jesus dwells in the heart of a man amidst almost universal desolation. The seed of agape lives in a man. As a result, God can pour a blessing through him to preserve the human race from extinction caused by the Eros seed. Noah is a prototype of the coming seed who will crush the serpent's head. By learning that God was gracious, Noah became a channel of blessing to all those who would respond to his message. Seeing the agape of God made him the agency of grace to the world. The message was simple. The world was going to end, and as an evidence that he trusted God, a large vessel was being built at the command of God to prepare for that event. Those who believed Noah and prepared to come into the ark would be saved. Those who rejected Noah as a fool would realize too late that they had rejected the only means of escape provided. For centuries, the Spirit of God had pleaded with men to turn from the principle of Eros and respond to the promised seed of Agape given to those who expressed faith in the slain Lamb. How long would the cry of the small children prepared for the pleasures and whims of debauched and wicked men be allowed to continue? Who can comprehend the grief of God as he witnessed such horrendous crimes? Day after day, year after year, century after century, there continued the pursuit of personal happiness, pleasure, and fantasy without regard to the one who gave all these things. It had to stop. Yet even then, God offered the world a way of escape if they should choose it. For 120 years, God reached out to fallen man through the preaching of Noah, warning, pleading, and calling. But the people were unmoved. Not even the amazing sight of the animals moving in an orderly fashion into the ark moved them. Their hearts were unmoved, unrepentant, and unsaved. And as the drops of rain begin to fall, there comes a sickening awareness that their life of base ingratitude towards God could possibly come to an end. As the lightning strikes the earth, in fury and thunder, violently shakes the ground, men then remembered the face of innocence that they had devoured and destroyed in their lust. The earth literally vomits forth the wretched filth in an act of revulsion. Nature had groaned under the wickedness of man, and now the toxic seed of Eros reaped their full reward. Men watched in horror as their homes were washed away and pagan altars were smashed to pieces. Shrieks of terror ripped the air, and curses towards God were on the lips of the guilty. Divine patience had expired, and now the great tide of evil and the slaughter of innocence was stopped dead in its tracks. Men had sown the seed of Eros into the earth, and now the earth itself gave birth to their wickedness. The violence of men was now reflected back to them in the violence of the earth. God was deeply grieved that he had to allow men the results of his own choice. They had driven him away, and this was the result. Hast thou marked the old way which wicked men have trodden, which were cut down out of time, whose foundation was overflown with a flood, which said unto God, Depart from us, and what can the Almighty do for them? Yet he filled their houses with good things, but the counsel of the wicked is far from me. Job 22:15-18. All that God had wanted to give to man to enjoy, share, and live in the shadow of his blessing was snatched away by the seed of the serpent. Who can comprehend the sorrow of God at the thought of these things? Yet there were 8 souls saved from the flood. The promised seed flickered with hope in the heart of Noah and held the promise of a new beginning. Chapter 8. A Blessed Man. Although the flood had wiped the earth clean of the vile deeds of man, ruled by an endless desire to take for themselves, the seeds of Eros clung on to the human race in the sons of Noah. Ham not only saw his father's nakedness, he had attempted to do something to his father while he was intoxicated. But when soberness returned, so did the knowledge that a vile crime had occurred. The dark deeds of antediluvian men, witnessed by Ham before the flood, found new life in him and released a new tide of evil upon the world. In allowing Eros to drive him to fulfill unnatural desires, he brought a curse upon not only himself, but also his children. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Genesis 9, verses 24 to 26. Right here we see a key relational principle. When men desire things for themselves that cause them to disrespect the one who gives them life, there the curse will be found. And when a man seeks only for himself, he teaches his children to seek only for themselves and to ignore the life and blessings given them by their parents or any in authority. The first son of Ham was Cush, and the first son of Cush was Nimrod. As the father had desired and taken that which did not belong to him, so Nimrod, in his desire to fill the lack of blessing in his life, raised armies of men and began to conquer neighbouring villages and communities and build his own kingdom. See Genesis 10, verses 10 and 11. Josephus tells us a little about Nimrod. Now it was to Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man, and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe strength to God, as if it were through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. Josephus, Antiquities Book 1, Chapter 4, Paragraph 2. Here we observe the natural progression of Eros that leads men to seek for themselves. 1. Ascribe strength to yourself. You shall not surely die. 2. Believe happiness comes through your own courage. Take what you desire for yourself. 3. Aspire to rule over all. You shall be like God. Of course, once you start this cycle, you are destined to disappointment and then repulsion by those whom you seek to extract what you desire from. When men seek to extract praise and worship from other men, they will naturally repel such efforts, and war is the result. Within a very short period of time, the world was once again engulfed in the cycle of Eros, and the desire to have and rule over. As men rejected the truth that all they possessed was a gift from God, the more they felt the curse of selfishness in their souls. Within a number of decades, Nimrod had created his own empire with an army, a religion based around sex and nature worship, and a society that put God out of their minds. Once again the world was full of men, full of desire and empty of gratitude. Nearly all the families of the earth were operating on Eros-based attraction and repulsion, rather than Agape-based gratitude and honour towards those who had given life. Once again, men's thoughts were only of food, sex, power, and war in a desperate effort to find one's own divinity. The story of Ham and Nimrod provides a lesson of how tyranny can grow from one selfish act into an army locked in combat, killing, destroying, and smashing families. The eyes of the Lord searched to and fro through the earth to find a man whose heart was willing to believe that he was blessed, a man whose soul was perfumed with gratitude and could become the cornerstone of a new agape motive for the world. Once God could find a man who chose to believe he was blessed, he could pour blessing upon him without fear that those blessings would turn his heart away from the giver. Right in the heart of Nimrod's selfish empire, such a man was found. He was like a tender shoot in the desolation of desire that surrounded him. This man was Abram. Abram was still affected by the culture of Eros, but his heart was tender enough to be taught to love the God who made all things and become his friend. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. Notice carefully that God said he would bless Abram and that he would be a blessing. Only a blessed man can be a blessing to his family and his community. God would make Abram great, not so he could please himself, but rather that he might bless all the families of the earth. And yet this transaction was not as simple as it might sound. The seeds of Eros inherited from Adam meant that Abram would have to wrestle against the idea that good things only come to those who seek them and put an effort to take and possess them. When God said that he would bless Abram, there was only one condition: leave your country, your culture, full of idolatry. Leave this and walk with me. But becoming a mighty nation can't be as simple as that. Surely not. Leave behind all the contacts and people that could elevate you and go and live in the wilderness where there are few people around except those with strange backward customs and practices. This does not seem like a very wise way to become a great and mighty nation. Abraham obeyed the command and left his familiar surroundings. He followed a path that appeared opposite of becoming a great nation. Once again, God reaffirms his promise to Abraham. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. Genesis 12, verse 7. Abram faced a series of challenges, but none greater than the fact that he had no son. If Abram was going to become a great nation, he needed to have at least one son. Does he continue to believe, or does he decide to do something about it? Does he trust the promise maker, or does he make the promise come to pass himself? One night as he pondered these things, God came to him. And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad, and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it unto him for righteousness. Genesis 15, verses 3 to 6. Here is the simple secret to righteousness. Believe what God tells you he will bless you with. Believe you are a blessed person. That's it. And what has God blessed each of us with? He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Romans 8, verse 32. If God has given us his Son, then we can be sure that he will freely give us all things. We simply need to believe him. This is exactly what Abram did. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Genesis 15, verse 6. This is the secret to joy in any relationship. This is the spark that will ignite the agape of God in the soul. Believe that God will give you what he has promised, and believe that he is the one who has given you all that you already have. When you do this, like Abram, you will become a blessed person, and a blessed person will overflow with a desire to give, even as he has been given. This is the secret of lasting happiness in marriage. Dwell upon all you have been given, and you will desire to give, which is God's blessed way for us. Dwell on all that you should receive, and you will take in order to receive, which is our own desolating way. Does your spouse not treat you as you deserve? Then treat them as you feel you deserve. Is there nothing to be thankful for? Had God not fed and clothed you and provided you shelter? Did he not open 1,000 roses for you and make the light dance on the water? Did he not paint the sky a brilliant golden colour as the sun began to set? Can you truly say you have not been blessed? Obviously, this process becomes very hard when one spouse chooses to be selfish and domineering. Holding on to the light that God has given us allows us to find joy, though many things be clouded with sorrow. Yet if we cease to find something to be thankful for, we surrender to selfishness and we become like the other spouse, filled with selfish regret and self-pity. Ham and Nimrod were cursed men, because the desire to take and possess to find happiness will always lead to disappointment. If we are taking to be happy, then we are the sons of cursed men, and we will curse others. Abram was a blessed man. If we are children of Abram, then we must believe that we are children of a blessed man. And if we are children of a blessed man, then truly we are blessed. And he that is blessed will bless. Freely you have received, freely give.